Okay, folks, we're about to start, and Mr. Genus will present on Red Hat Enterprise Linux OpenStack platform number 7, I guess. Let me do a plug for my employer for a moment. I work at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, and they have an open house for the public this Saturday, 9 to 6, I think. So if you're interested in seeing the NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, go there and take your family. And actually, we build spacecraft there too, so that's interesting. What was that? This Saturday, 9 to 6, in Greenbelt, Maryland. Go to the main gate, and it's free. There will be food trucks there also. I'm sorry? Some places it's allowed. So it's in Greenbelt, Maryland.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So now we're talking OpenStack to the OpenStack group, which is really why you're here. Just some background. Well, we'll skip that part. I was hoping to actually dive right in and explain the differences between, I'll do that now. So upstream, let's just go back here, that way you can not pay attention. Upstream, we have OpenStack.org. And in OpenStack.org, that's pure community. That's where all these changes globally are happening. There's a release schedule that basically happens every 6 months, and a new release comes out. From that release, Red Hat produces what's called RDO. I don't know how it came up with the name, but that is what we have. That's our community offering. And again, that's going to be Red Hat resources that are helping in upstream, but also in RDO. What we produce from RDO is RHEL OSP, OpenStack platform. This is a supported offering around OpenStack. Some of this information will be similar to what we've already covered in the previous discussion around bimodal IT. And I think I don't need to beat this to a pulp here. But what you really have is that at a level of IT operations, we're trying to figure out how to meet the needs of our customers who are going to the outside world and doing stuff on Amazon or Google or Rackspace, and they expect us to respond with that same rapidity as other external cloud providers. What they don't realize is that those other cloud providers have other revenue streams that allow that to happen. So we're trying to figure out how to make this happen within the context of the resources we have and to be able to plan in an efficient manner for the next 3 to 5 years. That's how I've always looked at this. And that's where OpenStack comes into place. The reason it happens is that it allows you to standardize your hardware and then set those nodes up to either be compute nodes, storage nodes, or networking nodes. 3 different functions for all of them. And then that becomes your environment that you can hand over to application developers. They can go through and create their own projects inside of OpenStack and begin to play around with it without having to call you to divvy up those resources for them. So the reason this is all happening is, we talked about this before, but just the ubiquitous nature of broadband. The fact that I can get gigabit service now at my house is stunning. I mean, that's just crazy. And it's coming now for cell phones. Verizon's talking about rolling out 5G. So all of a sudden, you're going to have much more throughput available on all these devices, which means you can do more on applications. And that's the driver for all of that. The question is, how do we, as IT operations, adapt to those changing environments? And the biggest way is to make sure that our services are virtualized, to be honest with you, right? You virtualize your services, you upgrade your hardware on the back end, and you get the benefit over time. And you get the benefit in a controlled way. You don't have to tear apart your whole data center to do that either. So what do your customers see? Your customers see IT responding to my business requirements in a timely fashion. There's very little need to go out to Amazon or to a Rackspace or to a Google Compute unless you don't have the resources to meet that need inside the house. And then it's just temporary. You burst out and bring it back in once you have the resources. So, are most of you familiar at some level with OpenStack, what it is? Right? raise your hand if you're not. And, sort of. Okay. So what we'll do, OpenStack at a high level. Yes, sir. OpenStack is number one. It's API driven, and what you have really you have a series of Nova Compute nodes. Where is that going to be on here? Those are your workhorses, right? Those are the nodes that you set aside to run the actual workload. You have storage here that's available in 3 different kinds. At least right now, there are many more formats available in the community versions. We'll talk about what we are supporting as far as Red Hat. So you have Sender for your block storage, Glance for your images, and then you also have Swift, which is an API for object storage. Right? So you can put objects then inside of your data system, into your storage systems. You've got Neutron here for networking. So Mr. Hubert here does all the networking side. You actually have an SDN developer here in-house, so you can ask questions directly and get information from him about this. But this beautiful part here is all software-defined networking, right? So no longer is your networking tied to your physical hardware. What does that mean? That means wherever you can run this OpenStack, you then have all this flexibility for the environment and for consumers to use this environment in ways you didn't have previously. Ironic is here for bare metal provisioning, and that allows you, that's sort of the mechanism behind the scenes, so as you add more hardware to your environment, it's provisioned to become either a compute node or a storage node in that OpenStack environment. On the top layer, you've got Ceilometer here for monitoring, you've got data processing with Sahara, and orchestration is the templating function that allows you to deploy workloads and environments in their complete state all through orchestration there. So once that's set up, those are templates that are set up. You run the template, it sends out an entire environment for you. It's running. And when you need an environment decommed, you just simply retire the environment. And it tears down all those instances that were created and frees up those resources then for other people to use.
Hey, James, one
Yes, sir.
question about storage.
Yes.
Where does Ceph fit into the storage
So-
paradigm there?
Yeah, so this is simply at the right now we're just talking about OpenStack. Ceph sits underneath as a storage backend to all of your compute nodes. So,
It's a back-end or front-end, an abstraction layer?
So storage, you'll have Ceph storage presented out to your compute nodes for consumption.
Okay,
Thank you. Does that make sense?
absolutely.
Okay. The shared services come about in terms of identity, which is Keystone. And then there was a question about Horizon. Horizon is still here. That's the dashboard you log into where you can look at your projects, create new projects, assign networks, assign compute nodes. And all of that then is really deployed through OOO, right? This has been, I will tell you, some of the most challenging part in terms of the deployment. Initially, it was just PackStack, right? Raise your hand if you've installed OpenStack yet. No? So we got a couple of folks in here. So originally it was PackStack. For some places, for some people, that was a challenge. I liked it. I found it pretty straightforward. And there was a move really to be able to do this in a graphical way. And in RHEL 6, we had Stay Puft, the installer for Stay Puft. Ghostbusters, the Stay Puft Marshmallow, I don't know. I was like, really? Really, folks? But I found that tool to be very good because effectively what it did, it allowed you to deploy your environments either in an HA configuration or a non-HA configuration. And for people, it eased the deployment and management of the environment. What you'll see for RHEL 7 is we have a new tool called Director. And the goal behind Director is you actually deploy, well, we'll talk about it. We'll get there in a couple of seconds. We've talked about OpenStack already. Why do you do this? It's for scale out. Really, OpenStack is for distributed computing, right, at a high level. And I think we've covered that pretty well. Are you ready for OpenStack? What I will tell you is even if you think you are not ready for OpenStack, you should be using OpenStack. Because what will happen is, if you're not doing OpenStack, you're going to find out from your business people they're using Amazon already. Because you didn't have OpenStack running in your environment, right? And we refer to that as shadow IT. For me personally, there may always be a use case for going to Amazon. If I need to order, I'll go back to my example about living in Maine. It took a long time to get equipment to Maine. So if I needed, I had to plan in advance because of our remote location. That's a use case where my researchers could go out to Amazon to do things, right? And until we get the hardware in place, once we have the hardware in place, they bring those workloads back into our data center. But I would always say play around with technology, because the more you do right now, the better you're prepared when it's going to happen. And it will happen. It's simply a matter of time. Why Red Hat? You can call us, number one. When you do a subscription for OpenStack, you have a place to call for help. We have a lot of committers also to the upstream projects. We're heavily invested in making sure that OpenStack meets the enterprise requirements. And by enterprise, I mean you can't you're not going to run your business on 6-month upgrades. Nobody does that for key infrastructure and stays around for very long. So most companies need 3 to 5 year life cycles on deployments of infrastructure, right? That's where we come into play. We give you these 3-year life cycles on OpenStack so you can deploy it and know and plan accordingly across your environment. The goal is to reduce your risk at the end of the day, enable you to meet the IT requirements, the business requirements, without being a risk to do so. OpenStack from Red Hat, actually we bring all the hardware certifications in that come from Red Hat Enterprise Linux. You get that goodness already with OpenStack as well. If you're not familiar with Red Hat Enterprise Linux, you get a 10-year life cycle support, hardware certifications across the board for most of the hardware out there. So you can deploy with a high degree of confidence. If you don't, there's no way to get this without Linux, to be honest with you. Right? This all happens because of Linux. All this development occurs because of Linux. What does that mean? At the end of it, and I hope I pressed the correct button here. I think I am. This OpenStack is simply building on the work we did with KVM back in 2000. When did that happen? Going to, from Zen to KVM in 2008, 2009, that time period. OpenStack builds on top of that. So it really is, it is new, but it doesn't, it is just building on what we've done in the past. So all that support, all that stability carries forward with OpenStack right now. It's already set up. We've talked about this previously, but containerized workloads. RHEL 7, when it came out in July 2014, came out. We had enough foresight to support containerized workloads then. Containers are not new, just this format of them is new. So SE Linux is a part of containers, C groups is a part of containers, the Docker format is a container format, and now we support that in RHEL 7, and it's supported in Enterprise Linux version 7 as well, OSP version 7. The other part that comes is that on the networking side, RHEL 7 has this, it takes advantage of all the kernel namespace that's going on. That's really why OpenStack version 7 is so great. It's using those key components that are already there to allow your applications to sit on there and to speak with each other across that environment. So. This is the meat in terms of the deployment model, and where people have struggled in the past, we're trying to make this easier. Director is now this tool that does that for you. The idea behind it is to first install OpenStack. First look at your environment. So you've got, let's say, 1,000 compute nodes in your environment. The first thing you do is you install OpenStack on all those compute nodes. Then they refer to that as the undercloud. The overcloud is what sits on top, and the overcloud are other OpenStack instances that run on top of OpenStack that your users consume. So what does that provide for you? It means you've got the same management for both the hardware underneath and the application space on top. And ideally, and it allows all the HA components to be baked in as well. And I think that's been the biggest driver from the enterprise, is making sure that these key services, in terms of the controllers, in terms of Neutron, are actually HA. Because if they go down, the business shouldn't stop. And hardware can fail. And so if it does, your OpenStack environment shouldn't fail with it. So that's why this is designed the way it is. Does that make sense? I'm talking a lot. If you have questions, throw a bottle at me, do whatever you need to do to get my attention. The other part of it is deployment consistency. As much as I love PackStack, there's lots of different ways to deploy an OpenStack environment. And that, for enterprises, means uncertainty. So Director removes that uncertainty by a common deployment model across the environment. It's also, because it's a GUI, it really does allow people to do this much more easier than they would have done in the past. It handles the health checks to make sure that your underlying hardware is okay. It notifies you when there's a problem, so you can decom those boxes, move them out of the environment for maintenance and things like that. So it also begins to make it easier for lifecycle management. That is migrating from, let's say, OSP 6 to OSP 7, or from OSP 7 to OSP 8, right? These migration paths become a little bit easier now with this tool than they were in the past. So you can see what's going on across your environment much easier, because similar to CloudForms, Director tool actually gives you all of the visibility across your environment for compute, networking, and storage, both the under cloud and the over cloud. So your users you can see what's going on with their environments, but you can also see what's happening with the hardware that's providing that environment to your users. If you've installed OpenStack in the past, this will be a big difference between just going from OpenStack version 4 or version 5. This is a really huge change. I would say the biggest part of this on the compute side is NFV, network. Yes, sir.
Just wait a second.
Is Director part of RDO as well, or is it just in the paid offering?
All of this should be upstream, so Director should be in RDO as well.
Okay.
As whatever we do in supported comes from our upstream community, so it should be in RDO as well for testing.
Cool.
So, are there any questions? No. So RDO. Oh.
Okay. I guess the question is the RDO for Director is an equivalent to OO or?
So Director uses OO underneath as part of the installation. OO was a project started in the community to run OpenStack on OpenStack. That's the goal of it. RDO is the upstream community for Red Hat Enterprise Linux OpenStack platform. So when you want an idea of what's coming out in the supported offering, which is RHEL OSP, you should look to RDO for that information. So everything that happens in RDO eventually trickles down into RHEL OSP for support. So you can use RDO to your heart's content, but you can't get any help with it. It's just community. If you need production level support and help, you would use OSP, RHEL OSP for that. So.
Is the version of the RDO, when you're saying 7, is that equivalent to the OpenStack, like Kilo, Liberty?
Right, so RDO, the RDO release cycle matches the upstream of OpenStack.org. So every time there's a new version of OpenStack on the community, at the very top, you'll see a new version of RDO as well within a few days. So. And then we take from that RDO release and build RHEL OSP from there. So it's a very similar model. What happens with Red Hat Enterprise Linux, there's Fedora, and if you use Fedora, it's at Fedora 22. By the time RHEL 8 comes out, it might be Fedora 30 or Fedora 80, whatever that number might be. But that's the sort of model. So the release of RHEL is tied to a release of Fedora as well. So. Are there Other questions before I move on? Okay. Yeah. I will say this aspect in terms of networking is the biggest driver. I hear this the most from customers.
What is NFV?
NFV is network function virtualization.
Okay, thanks.
I apologize. When I say anything that you don't know, throw a beer bottle at me. All of NFV is how do you virtualize your core network functions? The reason this is happening is, again, we talked about this before, hardware is pretty good right now. And you can do a lot in software. If you do it in software, it's much easier to maintain over time because you're not tied to a specific kind of hardware. You can upgrade your hardware in the back end, and you can change your software to meet the capacity of that hardware. But it doesn't have to be proprietary hardware any longer to get those speeds. So, am I saying that correctly, Thomas? Oh, hold on. Here you go.
I just wanted to add, so from my view of it, this is not official but the NFV really, I think, also refers to not just VCU pinning, but that network functions are like load balancers, are things that have now largely proprietary solutions like firewalls, and so NFV is the virtualization of those network functions. In other words, it's the networking infrastructure that makes the network itself go. Routers and things like that, in and of themselves, can be virtualized, and so the current thrust in I'm sorry, I don't mean to be stealing your platform, but the current thrust in OpenStack, in conjunction with Open Daylight, a lot of the energy is going toward not only network function virtualization, but this stuff called service function chaining. So you can go out there and you can stand up these network function virtualizations and get the packets to them that are supposed to get to them inside your cloud, and in your overlay, and so on. I hope I'm making sense, but I thought that might. Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Tom Herbert. I'm a upstream developer. I'm a developer at Red Hat. I'm not important to him. I have no official customer role, though. I guess if the customers have a problem, they'll maybe get a hold of us.
Okay, thanks.
What I will say is that when you really want the technical guts of this, Tom is a person to contact because he's intimately involved in writing the code for a lot of these functions as well. So this has been a common request from customers for the better part of the last 3 to 4 years, right? Because at the end of the day, if you can't get packets through at a high rate of speed to a specific area in a secure manner, it's very difficult then to deploy these applications in this environment. Because your customers, they want to know that their data is separate from, that there's no bleed over between all of these things, right? And that's a common concern with shared resources. How do you make sure that, Alex, your data is somewhere, Tom, your data is somewhere, and the two are not being shared without explicit sharing happening? So I think that's a phenomenal area. I can see customers benefiting from that tremendously. The compute node also then handles your resources related to CPU, to memory, to disk, because you're going to actually on the back end present, you're going to do storage based on some of that disk space that's in that server, right? And your networking components as well. Yes, sir.
Do you see anybody's request for the resource like GPUs?
Yes. So the question is, do I see requests to use GPUs? The answer is yes. There are a lot of customers that are requesting to use GPUs. There's actually some work going on in that space. I don't believe any of it's right now in OSP 7, but there's some talk and engineering going on behind the scenes to support that. Because that becomes another way to get processing done, right? And in fact, I had researchers ask me that very same question. They would go out and buy servers with all these GPUs in them. How can we use those for processing as well? So, on the networking side, on the networking side, for those places that are actually using IPv6, some places do. There's full support now for that in OpenStack version 7. Probably the biggest area that I see, there's always load balancing as a service that people want. They've been asking about. There's a lot of integration points that happen with third-party companies, like maybe a Cisco or other networking tools. So we do have some integration points there. I've always advised keep your environments sort of, I don't want to say basic, but the fewer integration points, the more stability you have right now. That allows all these technologies to mature over time, so that when you do the integrations then with Cisco or Juniper or Aruba for networking gear, your environment is much more stable. So all of this still happens. It has happened before within OpenStack. Managing your IP addresses, your DHCP leases. A lot of this is software defined, and so customers get a chance to set up the networks that they get to use, the gateways that they assign, the floating IP addresses that can be used as well, and the ability for different tenants to talk to each other if that's really what they want. And security as well. That typically happens in the security group side of it. On the block storage, and this is where Hasim, yes sir. No, please.
Back to your last slide with regards to the network.
Yeah.
Where is the firewall as a service is falling in?
So right now, most of that's done in security groups. Firewall as a service, you'll see quite a few numbers of upstream components that may just be tech preview right now for RHEL OSP. What tech preview means is that we're waiting for that project to solidify. Right? If there's enough weight in the community thrown behind the project, then it gets brought into the OSP platform as supported part of it. So right now, things like Trove, those are all tech previews, not really supported, but available. So you can play around with it. I wouldn't deploy a tech preview into production, right? Because it may, in most cases, if it's a tech preview, it becomes supported, but there's always the chance it may not be supported. And if your business is dependent on it and support goes away, that puts you at risk. So, but most of that should be in tech preview as far as firewall as a service. Security groups handle what ports are open, access, you set that all up within a project and a tenant. So, does that answer your question for you?
Setting up another one, for example, like PFSense, which is a firewall software base, right?
Yeah.
How would that be part of the software-defined network in the data center? So each like VPC, for example, say, I need another firewall for my VPC.
Right. So, from my standpoint, I would probably handle that still all within OpenStack. And the reason I would is that the chance of you going to another cloud provider and them having the exact same hardware solution that you've deployed for your application may not be high, right? If you do all that within OpenStack, you at least know that when you run that in your other environment, it's going to run the same way, right? So your security groups, which handle access, ingress and egress, that's effectively going to be your firewall rules right now for the environment. If you define an OpenStack in your environment, it'll be the same way if you define them in another cloud provider as well.
Does OpenStack provide logging of the security group activity?
That logging is all done and available through Ceilometer as well. So you can check all those logs on the back end to see what's going on.
So if somebody is attempting to enter an instance and the security group detects that and there's no inbound traffic permitted on that port and that IP address, is that logged? In AWS, it's not. Actually, it is, but it's not available
It's
to the
not
customers.
available to you as the
to me.
consumer, right?
But does OpenStack provide that capability?
I would have to check.
Because
specific-
security audits
Yeah.
in the government require
Right.
that you can see who's attempting
Right.
to enter the instances, but we have no window into that.
You have no. That's a good question. Let me double check and
Okay.
find out for you exactly, because I don't want to give you the wrong answer.
Okay.
I don't know if you know, Tom, off the top of your head, if that's logging. So,
Firewall as a service where the logs go.
right.
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
I have a question, and I'm not sure if I'm off topic because network is up there and I see OVS. I'm assuming that refers to Open vSwitch. I was curious in the OpenStack Platform 7 if you're actually exposing the Open vSwitch utilities. I know that you haven't in the past.
I might be able to answer that. I'm Tom Herbert, and I do work for Red Hat, but I work in the upstream communities. And so I'm not sometimes quite familiar with what happens downstream when it actually gets to be a product. But I do say that that's the direction things are going, is that the legacy way is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, James, but the legacy way in OpenStack was to use Linux bridging and namespaces, right, to distribute the network. And a lot of people are saying that doesn't scale very well. So the way we're doing it moving forward, we being in the community, and I think, and this will be is becoming part of Red Hat, is to use OVS instances in the compute nodes and to manage them with the distributed networking model and the direction we're going right now is to use OVS-DB, which is a protocol inside Open Daylight, and using Open Daylight, which is an SDN controller, and using that as a component in the OpenStack ecosystem. And you mentioned the pre-release and the extras channels and all that stuff, and sometimes I get confused as to which is which. But some of this stuff is getting pushed out to our customers at this point, and to work with RHEL as well. So, but that's the direction things are going.
Thanks.
So we can also check, Alex, to make sure. So you're asking about OVS utilities, if they're exposed now. And so we'll see if we can find that out for you. You have my card as well, so we'll get that answered for you. So, are there any other questions before I move on in terms of the networking side? Block storage. One of the nice parts about Director is that now it can actually deploy Ceph as well as OpenStack nodes in the environment. In the past, you typically had to have your Ceph environment already set up. You integrate that in with your OpenStack when you deploy it. There was no easy way to do that. And it's now here as a part of OpenStack version 7. What does that get you? The same kind of storage across all your block devices in your system. So in the past, you may have had storage in each one of your compute nodes that can be allocated then out for storage that can be consumed by your OpenStack environment. There are some organizations that will simply set up a farm of just nothing but storage nodes, right? That was my thinking behind this. We've got a bunch of nodes that are just going to do nothing but storage. I'll put Ceph on top of those or Gluster on top of those, feed that back out to my OpenStack environment. And so now that's all integrated in with OpenStack version 7. It makes installation much easier than it was in the past. So the goal, again, behind all of this is reducing the complexity to making sure this gets deployed for you. So object storage, again, that's on the Swift side. Not a whole lot has changed. I mean, it's still compatible with Amazon S3. It's been there for the last few releases. It'll be there moving forward. So, I think we talked about Ceph integration. Is there anything special here? For those of you who have done OpenStack deployments, have you used Ceph already in that environment, or what did you use for? You use Ceph, okay, and Ceph as well. So you're familiar with it?
I know that a lot of folks out there saying that don't format it with BitterFS because it's not production ready. So we tried it out and see how it goes, but yeah, we have an issue on that too. So
Yeah. So you used it with ButterFS as the underlying file system, and you used Ceph with what as the underlying volume? Did you use XT or XFS or? Okay. So there was some comments about using ButterFS as opposed to XFS, or just if you don't know, for RHEL 7, XFS is the default file system that ships out of the box. It's the fastest performing file system that we have. Not that we create, but that we have. I was corrected by a customer on that. And ButterFS is there maybe as tech preview. There are questions about long-term support with ButterFS though. So as a part of the installation now, it makes it much easier to identify your to assign Ceph nodes for your RDP, and it's HA out of the box now, where it wasn't previously with OSP version 6. Is this too far in the weeds for you, or is this good, bad? I mean, is this helpful for you? Okay. Upgrades in terms of identity. So this is on the Keystone side. Probably the biggest is the support of SAML now. So you have a single way to do authentication across all of the environment. So you can tie that back into your either Active Directory or IDM if you have that in your environment. So,
I have a
yes,
question, James.
Yes.
So, is there a RHEL 7 that is not does not have OpenStack capabilities, or is every RHEL 7 capable of doing OpenStack?
So RHEL 7 as a platform is where we do OpenStack development first.
Okay.
So every RHEL system can run OpenStack. Not every RHEL system will run OpenStack.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. I talk about OpenStack platform separate from Red Hat Enterprise Linux. OpenStack platform is on top of Red Hat Enterprise Linux. And so on the identity side, OpenStack now incorporates, I think, as I said, support for SAML, so that makes it easier to integrate your authentication and access into your tenant workloads now in ways that were not as easy with OSP 6 or OSP 5. And so it does tie into things like LDAP, so Active Directory or IDM. For those of you who are not familiar with IDM, that is the free IPA offering that ships in RHEL 7 that does identity management and access. And it's typically used for your Linux environments. So, let's see. What do we have next? Yes, do you have a question?
no. Just, yeah.
Okay. All right. So, as far as shared services, Ceilometer here is for monitoring, really for collecting data across your environment. That's been around since OSP 5 and OSP 6. That's basically, for lack of a better term, if you don't have cloud forms, Ceilometer provides that information to you, right? Data processing is for doing shared data across your environment, so things like Hadoop. This is no longer a tech preview. So your question about firewall as a service, previously Sahara was a tech preview in OSP 6. Now it's moved from tech preview into a supported component of OSP 7. So firewall as a service may follow that same path. I would expect it to over time. For orchestration, again, we touched on this earlier, which is your heat templates. That is basically how you build out what your environment needs to be with this. It's a YAML file at the end of the day. You import that and run it into your environment, and it builds it all for you out of the box. So, how are we doing for time, Hasim? Are we?
10 minutes
10 minutes. All right.
at most.
All right. There we go. So we'll skip over some of this. Hypervisor support. You can run OpenStack Platform 7 now on KVM, RHEL KVM, and VMware. So if you have VMware in your environment, now you can run OpenStack on that as well. Virtual guest support, even though these systems, they're available, I hope you're not running RHEL 3 or RHEL 4. You may be running RHEL 5, but you can, with containerized workloads, you may have an application that needs RHEL 3 to run, build a container for it. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So you can run all those different operating systems on the RHEL side, SUSE is available, and Microsoft workloads can now run on OpenStack as well. And we support you in doing that. That's the bigger takeaway. Our ecosystem is huge. All the same things that carry forward with RHEL carry forward into OpenStack. On the ISVs, the OEMs, partners, integrators, folks like Mavenspire, they're here to help you in that context as well. And then there are training components available with this as well. I will talk, there's Red Hat Learning Subscription that's available. It's a subscription that gives you unlimited access to all these classes. They change very quickly. RHEL OSP is coming out quickly. OpenStack is coming out quickly. All these offerings happen very quickly. The learning subscription allows you to take as many of those classes at your schedule and as much as you want, regardless of what changes. So, that's it. You asked about Tech Preview. So what's happening? What do we have here? Manila for shared access, right? So that's now file services that are shared. You have database as a service, which is Trove, and you also have, and I can't read that right now, but DNS as a service. This one is going to be important, right? Because DNS is life. If DNS fails, your world ends. So, and I mean, that's just it. So we can talk about that, but I didn't see firewall as a service on there right now. And so there may be some time before that hits Tech Preview, and that's dependent on upstream community, right? We don't control that there. So support for containerized workloads is on the way, and I think it's probably a good place to stop given the time constraints. We can talk about community contributions if you want, but the real takeaway is you'll see the very top here, commits, Red Hat, we're at the top of that, right? What does that mean? That's community. We've put a lot of investment in time and resources to make sure that OpenStack works. And we're not doing it all, but we're committing to a lot of it here. So OpenStack is not going away anytime soon. The same thing that we did with RHEL, we're doing now with OpenStack. And this is a key component of your infrastructure. It's going to be here for time to come. And that's it. You know, we can stop there really and answer.
Let me ask you a question. What's in the next 18 months? What's the expected growth of OpenStack? That's a vague question.
It is.
It's a hard one to answer.
You know,
but for your gut feeling.
My gut feeling, based on what happened over the last 24 months, for companies that are just dipping their toe into really having shared organizations work together, because that's what OpenStack does. It changes cultures. It's not a technical issue. That's making sure that companies, storage and compute and networking know how to work together to solve a business problem. That's actually increasing over time. That's actually increasing. I don't have a fixed number because, I mean, every company is different. In the accounts that I cover right now, it's roughly 20% of them are really ready for OpenStack. One of them told me yesterday, he was like, we're just not ready. You know, we're not ready for this. So, and part of that is they just haven't retooled internally to be able to respond to customer needs, their customer needs this quickly. So I would think maybe 10, 20% increase over the next year, next 18 months. As this becomes easier to deploy, it reduces the obstacles for adoption as well.
So what is the easiest tool to deploy OpenStack?
Right now, I would say it's going to be not PackStack like it used to be, or not Stay Puft, but it'll be the tool that ships in RHEL OSP version 7, right? that's going to be the easiest way and the supported way moving forward. So,
Okay, thanks. Any other questions?
all
Okay,
right.
thank you, everyone. Thank you,
very
Mr.
much.
Genus.
Thank you.
Yes.
So thank you, everyone else, for coming. And when you look into your swag bag, there'll be more information about more of the educational events that we'll be sponsoring and presenting, and some fun stuff too, particularly in partnership with OpenStack DC. So again, thanks for coming out and everything. Any
And the
more?
Pope was too busy to stop by today.
Yes, the Pope was too busy, but I'm glad you ventured out. And we uploaded a lot of pictures onto
Meetup, yep.
Meetup, so hope you see yourself.
And thank you, Scotty, for the sponsorship.
Oh, pleasure.
And there's October 15 is the next event, and then November 19th. So please join us.